when you really understand what's true for you, and when you think about how you can set up a habit or a process in your life in the way that works for you, you're much more likely to succeed. There really is hope.
There's a key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a here's somebody who believes you. And let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Welcome to The Creator's Journey. I'm your host, Charles Gupton. Fears and obstacles on the journey of creation are things we all face. Every creator who works from the heart faces the same challenges. You're not alone. In each episode, I talk with creative leaders about the mindsets and processes they use to push through their struggles to create and put their work out into the world in order to make a difference. Thanks for joining me on this journey.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a home. Here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
My guest today started her career in law and was clerking for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she realized what she wanted for her own happiness was to be a writer. Although I've only been following Gretchen Rubin's work for the past 2.5 years, her most recent book, Better Than Before, has had a wondrous impact on my own habits and interactions with other people. What I love about her writing is her ability to distill and convey complex ideas in a way that's accessible to such a wide range of readers. Gretchen also has 2 previous bestsellers, Happier at Home, as well as The Happiness Project, which is an account of the year she spent test driving the wisdom of the ages, current scientific studies, and the lessons from popular culture about how to be happier. It spent more than 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list. And her website, GretchenRubin.com, is chock full of information and resources to better your life. Along with her sister, Elizabeth Kraft, Gretchen hosts her popular weekly podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which has been named one of iTunes' best podcasts of 2015. Welcome, Gretchen.
Hey, I'm very happy to be talking to you.
And happy we should be. I have looked forward to this conversation for a long time. You're one of a small handful of writers, including Brene Brown, Liz Gilbert, Amy Cuddy, and Susan Cain, that I've just talked a lot about when I do presentations, as well as on social media, as having such a great impact on my mindset. I feel like I'm a raving fan with a backstage pass today.
Excellent.
Let's start off with 3 people who've had the greatest influence in your life. What are some ways that they've impacted you most deeply?
Well, definitely my parents are the first 2. I have terrific parents who were great models. And then probably my husband. I mean, those are the 3 people who are closest to me. And my sister, as you mentioned, I have a podcast and I talk to her all the time. So I think my own family has probably had the greatest influence on me.
Talk about some of the influence that your parents have had on you and how you carry through. I've heard you talk about how your mom's voice is still there in the back of your head making decisions. What are some of the ways that that you've been impacted on a regular basis?
Well, one thing that my father always talks about is energy, is the importance of having energy. And the more I study happiness and habits, the more I realize the truth of that. Because when you have energy, things seem easier. Like if you're exhausted all the time, it's hard to do the things even that are going to make you happier. If you're exhausted, it's hard to plan a party or go for a run or resist eating ice cream or losing your temper. And if you have energy,
absolutely.
If you have energy, everything seems easier. And it's also easier to be around people who have energy. And if you're, there's certain people who kind of suck the life out of a room, and there's certain people who kind of, fill the sails of everyone around them. And I think there's really something to and I read this very complicated book that was extremely difficult to understand, that was all about Power in Networks, and it was a business school type book, and it was looking at how information moves through complex organizations, because this is a really important issue. And what they found is you could distill almost everything down to, does this person give you energy, or does this person take energy away from you? And that when people were seen as sources of energy, that people like connected with them, and that when people were seen as energy suckers, then people backed away from them. And so I think it's a really valuable way to think about the world, is like, how do I keep my energy, and how do I kind of radiate energy? And then for my mother is very interesting, because she has a love of adventure, and I'm not a very adventurous person, and I think it's a really good example for me to have somebody. She's just very intrepid. There's nothing she won't do or ask, or any place she won't go. And if you met her, you would not. She's not like the kind of person who's, climbing to the top of, of a mountain peak. But she's just very unintimidated by things. And I think that those are both very, very good qualities to keep in mind.
As you were talking about your dad's advice about energy, I haven't thought of this in a long time. I remember somebody making a comment that somebody had the ability to absolutely light up the room by walking out of it.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Right. We all know those folks. Yes. Yes.
In what ways have you ever felt different, at times maybe even a misfit from other people?
Well, it's interesting, because you mentioned that I started my career in law, and I did. And one of the things, and then I switched to becoming a writer. And one of the things that was really telling to me was that I was surrounded by co-clerks, because all the justices have several clerks, and we would hang out together and eat lunch together and socialize all the time. And these were terrific people. I'm really good friends with a lot of them to this day. But what I saw is they loved law. They wanted to talk about law during lunch, and they were reading law journals on the weekends, and they loved law. And I realized that I just didn't love law that way. Like, I did as good a job for Justice O'Connor as I could. It wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was just, I'm like, these people really love it in a way that I do not love. And it showed me, first of all, like, the satisfaction that you get when you're doing something that you love. Like, they were just having so much fun. And it also, then kind of more strategically, I thought, I can't compete against these people over the long run, because it's very hard for sort of diligence to keep pace with enthusiasm. Like, they did it because they loved it. And I was doing it because that was my job. And I was like, I want to do something where what I do on the weekends is the same thing that I do during the week, because that was how they felt. And so that was one of the things that started me thinking that I might consider becoming a writer.
That's funny. I didn't study law, and so I don't relate quite on that level. But I've been a commercial photographer and now filmmaker for, over 35 years. And I love shooting photographs, but I've never had a love of the technical aspects.
Yeah.
That's not what wowed me the way it does some people. So when I've been in the company or at professional meetings with other photographers who talk about equipment and gear and exposure, and I'll find myself standing there catching my mouth hanging open going, okay. I love telling stories. Mm-hmm. And photographs and visual media are a conduit for telling stories, not the pictures themselves. So that just kind of rang a bell in my mind where you were talking about it, that it's the end result of what it does, not the method of it. So I felt kind of the same way through the years. What are some fears that you're struggling with right now? Is there anything that pops up in your mind?
I don't know. I don't really have fears.
That's good.
Oh, I know one thing I'm afraid of. I'm afraid to drive. I write about this in Happier at Home. I've been a fearful driver my whole life. My sister's also a fearful driver, and she lives in LA. She lived in LA for 3 years before she started driving, and she does drive now, but she still does not like to drive. And I do drive. I live in New York City. I do drive, and now I make myself drive to so that I don't go too long without driving, because the longer I go without driving, the worse it is. But it's definitely something where it weighs on my mind. I would not just jump in the car and go somewhere. And that's like, and I took driving lessons because I thought, well, if I took lessons, maybe I would feel more confident. And maybe that would help me with my fear. But unfortunately, the driver instructor did not understand the psychology. It's funny because he said, "Oh, many people take lessons with me because they're fearful drivers," and he had absolutely no insight into how to handle that. It's funny, like I keep thinking I should like write him a letter and say like, "This is what you did wrong," because I know how to drive perfectly well. Like my husband's always like, "I don't know what your deal is." Because you're a perfectly good driver. I am a perfectly good driver. But I really am kind of afraid to drive, and it's a drag.
That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the whole thing with the instructor is that there are people who are good at what they do, but they don't have self-awareness about how to help other people do it, which seems to come up a fair amount.
Well, and the thing is now I understand, like that was a while ago, and now I have much more insight. I think I would just tell him much more frankly, like, this is how you need to teach me, and like I would have been able to articulate it much more because I've thought about it much more. At that time I was much more like, he's the teacher. If I just learn from him, and now I'm like I've gotta do this in a particular way. So anyway, anybody who's an entrepreneur out there, I think there's definitely room for like the driving instructor who's not going to teach you to drive. He's going to teach you how like to be comfortable driving. And because it's because I've heard from a lot of people who have the same thing.
That's funny. Yeah, there's a lot there for entrepreneurs. There's a lot there to dig into. Yeah, how to get people around the mindsets. It's not always the practice. It's the mindsets behind it that are the critical obstacle. Good. Glad I asked. Let's talk about the concept that the habit of the habit is more important than the habit itself. That's become one of my regular mantras.
And what habit are you reminding yourself to keep the habit of?
I'm fascinated with processes, but I struggle with them myself. And I thought by talking with people about them, I become more focused on them. And there are a couple that you want to talk a little bit about meditation or possibly touch into it, because I remember you saying that it was something you tried but just couldn't get into. And it's been something I found that helps me, but it's difficult to establish that habit. Exercise is another one. I love to swim and I love to exercise, but pulling myself away from the desk and getting stuff done. I worship effectiveness, kind of efficiency, getting stuff done. That's another one. And once I start doing it, or I get into the habit of doing something, just honoring it for a few minutes, going for a walk, I go, wow, now I can make a 10-minute walk, a 30-minute walk, or run or something. So yeah, there are a bunch of them that I'm constantly concentrating on. And I use it as a mantra for myself, and I act like I know what I'm talking about when I tell somebody else to do it. So
And I think you're very wise with just like taking a 10-minute walk, because staying in the habit of whatever it is that you're trying to make the habit of kind of preserves that place in your life. And one of the things about habits is the more automatic they become, the more powerful they become, and the more freeing and energizing they become. And if you are constantly debating like, well, should I do it, or does it work for me, or do I feel like it? That is very, very draining. And so if you're like, okay, it's Monday morning, I'm going to exercise, but you're like, well, I've had this kind of emergency situation, I don't have time to go to swim. But you're like, well, I do have time to go for a walk. It keeps you in the habit of using that time in a particular way, and that keeps the habit strong. And this is important for people who like travel a lot, where they can't have a day that unfolds exactly the same way every time. So they need to find a way to kind of hold the place of that habit. Because the more automatic it becomes, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And travel has been one of the problems because of what I do. I do travel a fair amount, whether it's on projects or conferences or speaking or whatever. And yeah, that's when things get disrupted. Funny enough, though, it seems like I can exercise sometimes better when I'm traveling, because I think, okay, I've got to do this to keep my energy up. And then I get back home and think, well, it ought to be easy. And then it becomes, kind of the reverse, more difficult in my regular environment, interestingly enough at times.
Well, everybody's different. That's the thing. I think people make a mistake if they think like, this is what's hard and this is what's easy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how other people experience it, Or, I think sometimes we assume that we have challenges that aren't really challenges for us. Or, people say, well, this is the way you should be able to do it. Well, if it doesn't work for you, this comes up a lot with morning people and night people, because very, very common habit advice is that if something's really important to you, you should get up and do it first thing in the morning. And the fact is, for people who are morning people, that's good advice. Like, I do that because I'm a morning person and I start the day with a lot of energy. But a lot of people are night people, and they are just at their most productive and creative and energetic much later in the day. And the idea that they're going to get up early, especially earlier than they have to, they can probably barely drag themselves out of bed as it is, because the world is set up for morning people,
Yes.
not for night people. And the idea that you're going to get up early and go for a run before work is just like, it's just not going to work. It's not going to stick. And so the idea that you should be able to do it is just, it doesn't matter what you should be able, just do whatever works for you. So go, there's a lot of ways to exercise. Once you accept the fact, like, well, going for a run first thing in the morning is not going to work for me. Okay, well, then what are the other options? But if you just but sometimes people are like, well, this is the only way to do it. And I either try or fail with this method because this is the right way to do it. It's like, there is no right way to do it. It's whatever works for you.
Yeah, I am a morning person. I'm generally up by 5:30 most mornings, but that's my best reading, writing, thinking time. I think I don't want to do that. In the middle of the afternoon is the time to go do it. But then foolishly, I try to push through and do stuff at the worst time of the day because I just want to keep plowing. So that's back to the habit of the habit, is what I try to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I loved a lot of the concepts that you laid out in Better Than Before. It's one of the most practical, useful books that I've ever read. It's mostly
terrific. Spray
painted in highlight through it. But one of the most impactful concepts that you laid out were those around the Four Tendencies. They have radically transformed a lot of my interactions with other people. In fact, I was on a mastermind call earlier today with a group, and one of the women was asking about how to present certain questions as she was talking with people. And I immediately popped up and went, read the Four Tendencies in Better Than Before. Don't ask that question the same way to everybody, because you won't get the response you need from them. So I'm constantly telling people, this can transform your interactions, I believe.
Oh, excellent. I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm a questioner. My wife is an obliger, and I've got, for an assistant, a rebel.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it makes for interesting conversations, or a way to kind of process things out. But it's helped in our marriage a lot, because I realize as a questioner, I don't like getting questions. I like finding out why. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to overburden Linda with things, because she'll just be nice and do them. So anyway, it's really helped us transform how we ask each other to do things now. And so anyway, but I want to give you the opportunity to suss that out a little bit. I want to encourage people to take your quiz and buy your book, so they'll have it in their hands, because I think it's important to read it and incorporate the concepts. But I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about it and suss that out a little for folks.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to hear that you found it useful, because really my hope is that it really will reduce conflict and help people find common ground, because once you realize how somebody else is approaching something, it just gives you a lot of insight into how to like sort of strike a chord with them.
Absolutely.
So the four tendencies. So you mentioned a few of the categories. So there's upholders, questioners like you, obligers like your wife, rebels like your assistant. So, and it has to do with how a person responds to an expectation. So there are outer expectations like a work deadline or request from a spouse, and then there are inner expectations: your own desire to get back into meditation, your own desire to take photographs every single day. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. So they meet the work deadline, they keep a New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what's expected of them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important as other people's expectations of them. Then questioners, which is what you are, question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they hate anything arbitrary or unfair or irrational. They want everything to be justified. So if something seems justified to them, they'll do it. But if it doesn't seem justified, they'll reject it. So in a way, they make everything an inner expectation. It has to meet their criteria in order for them to act. So this is ringing true for you. Good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they love information. And then obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So, I first understood the obliger tendency when a friend said to me, I don't understand, because when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. But why can't I go running now? And the fact is, if you're an obliger, with a team and a coach, you have no trouble showing up. But when it's only your own expectation, you struggle. And so this comes up a lot in life. Like, oh, I work at a job and I have a supervisor and colleagues and deadlines and a boss. I have no trouble. But now I'm going to leave my job and be an entrepreneur and start my own business, and I'm paralyzed. Why? Because you don't have deadlines. You don't have accountability from your coworkers. So that's when you need outer accountability to allow you to meet inner expectations. Then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. They don't even want to tell themselves what to do. So they reject both outer and inner expectations. And it's interesting about you and your wife, because those are the two biggest tendencies by far. Overwhelmingly, people are obligers. That's the biggest tendency, or questioners. That's also a very, very large tendency. That's where most people fall. Upholders and rebels are like the polar, they're extreme types of personality, and there aren't very many. There are very, very few rebels, and there are just a few more upholders, which is my tendency. I'm an upholder. Those are kind of like the freaky fringe, and then most people are obligers or questioners. So if you're trying to communicate with people, you do well to assume like I'm probably dealing with an obliger or questioner, because those are the ones that most people fit into.
What I loved about your clarification of all of that is that most of my life I have seen and been seen, as I've been told by others, as a rebel in terms of kind of standing against things. But the way that you described it in the Four Tendencies was that, again, I was always questioning things. Yep. But once they were answered, I'm fine. And now that I look at and I think, wow, when I'm around rebels or deal with rebels, I think you only need so many of those before it disrupts the whole process.
No, I mean, you really put your finger on it, because there's a deep affinity between rebels and questioners. But if you really look at it, a questioner is like, why should I listen to you? But they're like, but if you can, like, I have a motto for all the, I collect mottos for the tendencies. And one of the questioner mottos is, convince me why, and I'll comply. So it's like, why should I listen to you? Now that can sound pretty impertinent.
Right.
Why should I listen to you? And so sometimes questioners are seen as being not team players or undermining or cheeky as children. They're in school. Why should I listen to you? But they really just want to know, why should I? But if you tell them why, then they can go. A rebel is much more, you can't make me. You're not the boss of me. I'm the one, and they have much more of a spirit of resistance. Like, you can't tell me what to do. And that's so it's in a lot of circumstances, you're exactly right. It looks very similar, but actually it's coming from a different place. Because one is very, like, once they decide that something meets their satisfaction, questioners will meet those expectations, whereas rebels will really, it's tougher to make the case that it's going to bring them along. They really are very focused on choice and freedom, self-expression, identity. You really need to hit those notes in order to get a rebel to move.
Awareness starts with self-awareness, I believe, and then we become more understanding of other people. But then irritating people with trying to help them become self-aware, sometimes it's not a chasm that's easy to bridge, as I'm sure you've found.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think for a lot of people, there's a very deep relief in understanding the pattern behind their tendency, because each of the tendencies has kind of the thing that they're like, they don't many obligers have been super relieved, because it's like, because a lot of times they're like, why is it that I have such low self-esteem that I can't put myself first? Or why is it that I can't make my own things a priority? And then when you're just like, you just need outer accountability. This is like a big thing that you don't have, there's no psychological, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just like a thing that a lot of people are this way. And so then they're like, oh, this is how you fix it. Outer accountability. Okay, no problem. And they kind of like, somebody was like, I've been in therapy for 10 years and like you solved my problem overnight, because it's like, and then the same thing with rebels. A lot of rebels are like, I don't understand why I couldn't just do things the normal way. Like, why can't I? Like, somebody wrote me this, like, if you're a rebel, you can't have like a nice normal wedding. You can't have a nice normal job. Like, I don't understand. Like, other people just like make plans and do them. Why can't I do that? And now that I see that I'm a rebel, I see, oh, there's lots of great things about being a rebel. And I see now how I can get myself where I want to go because I understand what was holding me back. And like upholders, they just sit around and they're like, what's the deal with everybody? Like, they're like, why? People just keep talking about stuff and not doing it. Like, what is up? And so like when they understand how they're different, and there's negatives to being upholders too, and how to manage that. I mean, questioners often do run into trouble because people don't understand. They just literally want their questions answered. It's misperceived. It's seen as being very challenging. Somebody just emailed me the other day saying she was fired for being a questioner and sort of described it. And she said, I have a boss who is an upholder and just like perceived my questioning as just like not just constantly challenging authority. Whereas I just literally was saying, why are we doing this?
Absolutely.
And so I think questioners with time and wisdom and experience can learn to say things like, instead of being like, why are we hiring that firm? They say things like, it's interesting that we're hiring this firm. Like, take me through the reasons, because I think I'll do a better job following through if I understand kind of the logic behind this decision. And then people are like, okay, I can answer your questions because I understand like why that works for me.
The context.
But questioners have to understand like that they do often will drain people and overwhelm them with their questions. And then also you pointed out this funny thing about questioners, which is hilarious to me because I'm married to a questioner. Questioners don't like to be questioned.
That's right.
They get super annoyed if you ask them questions. My husband,
I remember you saying Jamie didn't like it, right?
No, he literally will not answer questions. Like, I will ask him a question point blank, and he will not answer me. And it used to drive me crazy, and it still sort of drives me crazy. But at least now I know it's not aimed at me. Like, I think that's another thing, like talking about in marriages. A lot of people have said, like, well, I really was very upset because every time I asked my rebel husband to do something, he just wouldn't do it. But then it's like, now that you say that he's a rebel, I realize like that's true. He's like that with everybody. It has nothing to do with his relationship to me. It's his relationship to the world, which like for good or for ill, that's the guy I married. It's not an attack on me. And now that I realize my husband is like that, like he doesn't answer anybody's questions. It's like, again, it's like there's nothing about it. Like I can't be personally annoyed. I can be annoyed, but I don't take it personally anymore. And I also see how if I give him reasons for things, when I ask of him, he's much more likely to go along with it than if I just, as an upholder, I'm like, as an upholder, if he asks me to do something, I'll just do it. I don't need to know why he needs me to do it because I'm like, you must have I just trust that this is not a random request, and I don't really care. But I need to give him a reason because otherwise he's just like, well, why should I spend my time doing that?
That's funny. Where it's helped me change is my natural tendency is to bristle when I have to explain something. But irritating the person I'm with, my wife or someone else, does not further what I want to have happen here. That self-awareness has helped me realize that I don't need to irritate somebody. How can I reduce that friction, if you will?
Yeah.
And you've helped me do that just by changing that awareness and mindset. So,
oh, that's good. Excellent. Well, and you make a really good point that for a lot of questioners, it's very like they really struggle when they're asked to do something that seems arbitrary or irrational. And so and I hear this something like a guy in medical school was like, I'm asked to do these like every day practically. I'm asked to do something in medical school that just like doesn't make sense for me. And I just, it's like, it's killing me. And I said, well, what you have to do, just sort of what you were saying, you have to think about the second order of value. So maybe this assignment doesn't make sense to you on its own, but it's important to you and you do value the idea that you're going to earn the respect of your professor. So you're going to do this not because you think this assignment is going to help you learn, but because by doing this assignment, you show to your professor that you're taking medical school seriously and that you're, like you're a good student and all that. And same thing for you. You might say like, well, I don't understand like why I should be doing all these things, but I know that if I act in this way, it's going to be annoying to other people. And it's important to me that these relationships function smoothly. Therefore, I will do something that I consider to be maybe like a little bit dumb or arbitrary or unjustified because it's important to, or like one questioner said to me, like, my grandma always, like, doesn't like for me to wear pants to church. And I'm like, what difference grandma does it make if I wear pants to church? But now I do it because it pleases my grandmother if I wear a dress to church. And so I do it not because I think that wearing pants matters, but because my relationship with my grandmother matters. So it's like for that questioner, they have to like go to that second step because that intermediate step like drives them crazy if they think it's arbitrary.
Well, so much of our success we credit to kind of the hard skills, whatever profession we're in, whether it's law or communications or whatever. But it's the soft skills, the interpersonal relationships that frequently make success what it is. And that comes down to, again, removing that friction from relationships with people just to actually get things done.
Yeah.
And again, awareness, that I've just become just not only fascinated, but kind of engrossed with how to make communication actually work.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's just don't irritate people while you're doing things.
Well, and it's interesting that your assistant is a rebel because usually it's like you have to be, when you're communicating with a rebel, there's definitely things that you can do that will inspire in them a spirit of resistance. And so it's one of the things I've heard from many, many people about is like, how do you parent a rebel child? Because the more you like remind your rebel child to do their homework or clean up their room or stay in school, the more they resist. And so it's like becomes this very kind of poisonous cycle. And what people say with rebels, if there's anybody out there who's dealing with a rebel, is you want information, and I'd be curious to know if this is what works with your assistant, is information, consequences, choice. So you give just objective information about a situation, you explain the consequences of certain actions, and then you allow the rebel to choose because they're not stupid. Like they don't want to have a bad consequence, but they have to be allowed to experience negative consequences, which can be, sometimes we don't want the people around us to have to experience negative consequences, but that's the only way a rebel will change their behavior. But so even like with a little kid, you could say, well, information, choice, consequences. Information, if a person goes outside on a bright sunny day, they could get a bad sunburn. And a bad sunburn really, really hurts. Your skin can blister. And then you're stuck inside for like 3-4 days while your sunburn fades, while your friends are outside playing. Do you feel like wearing a hat and a long sleeve t-shirt, or do you feel like wearing sunscreen? And then it's just like, it's up to this kid. It's like, okay, you can either get a really bad sunburn and be trapped and uncomfortable, or you can do sunscreen lotion, or you can do clothing. And then they're free to decide what do they want. And so that's a very helpful thing with rebels, because if you even say something like, oh, you should read this book, you'll love it. A lot of times a rebel will be like, I'm not going to read that book. Somebody just emailed me saying like, I refuse to read Harry Potter. Because I was like, everybody keeps telling me how good it is. I refuse to read it. And then she like accidentally read it and was blown away. And so that spirit of resistance can be quite strong for rebels.
That's hilarious. Just based on that information, I have started changing the way I interact because I realized there was a lot of headbutting and a lot of broken communication. I thought, well, by asking questions and explaining, that would break through. And it wasn't. Taking that information and starting to apply it. I just wish I'd started applying it earlier.
Excellent. And again, most people can tell what they are just from that brief description. But as you mentioned, if you go to happiercast.com/quiz, there's a quick quiz that will kind of give you an answer of what and give you some sort of like a quick overview of what you might think about if somebody wants to learn what their tendency is.
And I'll put that link in the show notes as well.
I'm writing a book right now that's all about the Four Tendencies because so many people have been asking me for like more and more and more information about the Four Tendencies. And I have this section, which I love, which is the signage. Because you will see signs that are clearly aimed at one tendency or another tendency. And then there are really clever signs that manage to hit all four notes in very few words, and I'm like, oh, wow. Like they really did it. Or like there was this PSA about smoking that was really aimed right at the rebel. And I'm like, that's smart, and that might work on other people too, but you see that it's really going after a certain kind of perspective. Or like, I just now see them everywhere. And I get such a kick out of collecting these signs. Because
I work in communications and I'm frequently looking in advertising and marketing, sales letters. And now I recognize the tendencies in the communication.
Oh.
And I think a lot about who are you writing it for, or were you writing it for the right market? Or was the person who was writing this copy or generating this writing from their tendency without being aware of the market they're writing to?
100%. Oh my gosh, send me any examples. If you've come across any, send them to me in an email because I eat this stuff up. I would love to see them.
Now I do too. So
excellent.
Oh, well, a definition that you use for habit, which is something we do without decision making, is roughly the same definition that I use for processes. I see both as being designed to change the way we live for the better. Can you talk a bit about the need to find reward within the habit or the process itself, the intrinsic reasons versus looking to external rewards?
Yeah, this is maybe one of the most complex and challenging areas within habit formation, which is the very, very dangerous role that reward can play in habit formation. And I have to say, like, people's instinct is just like anything. Anytime there's any kind of desirable behavior, is to slap a reward on it. Like that's gonna work. And the problem with habits is that rewards often are very undermining to habits because getting a reward marks a finish. And when you're finished, you're done. You're like, oh, well, I ran the marathon. Amazing. Now I'm finished. And so you thought you were forming the habit of running regularly, but in fact you were working towards the reward of having completed, because a finish line is a kind of reward. I'm going to give up sugar for Lent. Well, but now Lent's over, so I'm going to go back. Instead of thinking like, oh, I'm going to eat healthfully indefinitely, you get caught up in this finish line. And also, a lot of times people give themselves perverse rewards, like, oh, if I stick to my budget for 2 months, I'm gonna go on I'm gonna give myself an afternoon at the mall. Or a friend of mine looked me straight in the eye and said, as soon as I lose this 10 pounds, I'm gonna give myself a big piece of chocolate cake. And it's just like that is just not the way. Now, like giving yourself a reward is a great way to meet a goal. But mostly with habits, it's something we want to do indefinitely. We want to exercise indefinitely. We want to eat healthfully indefinitely. We want to, write indefinitely. And so you're exactly right. The one reward there's two kinds of rewards that work. One is the kind of reward when you think like, wow, you look for the reward within the behavior, because the reason that you're having the habit is that there's something benefit that comes from it. So you want to focus in on that. Like, I love the feeling of deep relaxation that I have after a yoga class, or I love feeling like so smug when I'm done with my daily run, or I love the feeling of going to bed and knowing that I've eaten healthy meals all day long and that I'm not feeling bad about something that I ate, like 11 p.m. So you want to focus on that good feeling. And then there's also the kind of reward where the reward is attached to the idea of doing more of the very behavior. So you could say like, well, I'm doing so much yoga, I need a new yoga mat. Because what happens when you do a lot of yoga? You need a new yoga mat. Oh, I've been writing so much, I need a new laptop because the key is popping off. My M is popping off my keyboard. Well, a natural consequence of doing a lot of writing is maybe you're going to need a new laptop. I talked to a company where I thought they had a brilliant reward for exercise. So they had a program where if you went 75 times to the gym, and they monitored you, if you went 75 times to the gym in 1 year, the reward was not a T-shirt. The reward was not a cheesecake. The reward was the next year free.
Oh,
so
wow.
The reward going to the gym was more gym.
That
is a good reward. And if you're like one of the things on my, every, like a couple times a week, I do Facebook Live videos. And one of the things I talked about recently on Facebook was, how do you help children form the habit of reading? And not just the habit of reading, but the habit of loving to read, which I think is really what people want. And that's different. You can make people read, but you can't make them love to read. So how do you help them see reading as something that's really fun and something that they choose to do and something that they love to do? And one of the things is like, what is the reward for reading? Because people often do this things like, as soon as you've read for a half an hour, then you get your hour of screen time. And I'm like, that is the worst thing you can possibly do, because what you're teaching somebody is that I only read in order to get screen time. Reading is a deprivation, an imposition. Screen time is what a person does for fun. Reading is what you do when your mom makes you, and screen time is what you do if you're like let loose. The reward for reading should be more books. So you're like, oh my gosh, you've done so much reading this week. We'll make an extra trip to the library. Oh my gosh, you've read that whole stack of books. Let's go to the bookstore and buy you a couple more books. Oh, you really like that graphic novel? Oh, there's a whole series. Let's get you number 2 and 3. Because what good are more books except that to get you to do more reading? So that's a very positive kind of reward. But usually we have this impulse of like saying things like, oh, I went for a run, so now I get a beer. It's like, it's not going to help you run. People often have an idea that if they reward a behavior for a while, a habit will kind of set in and then it will continue automatically and the reward can cease. That does not happen. Often the behavior will stop even before the reward stops, and it almost always stops once the reward stops, unless it's something that a person can help. So for instance, let's say you have a little kid and you're potty training them and like you give them an M&M every time they successfully use the potty. Well, the thing is, you do not need to worry about the fact, like, are they going to stop using the potty if you take away the M&M? That kid's going to have to go to the bathroom eventually. Like you can only hold out for so long. So there it's not so much an issue. But can you skip going running for 6 months? Absolutely 100% you can. And so I think you just have to be very, very careful when you invoke rewards because they're very powerful and often not in a way that strengthens our habits.
And that's so counterintuitive to the way a lot of people think, but oh my God.
But
it makes so much sense.
Oh my gosh. I can't tell you. I'm at my computer jumping up and down in oh my God, don't do that. Because the more you because when we give ourselves a reward, we're teaching ourselves that there's something that you wouldn't naturally do.
Yes.
If you have to reward somebody for reading, if you have to reward somebody for eating healthfully, then they're just learning like this isn't something that a person would choose to do. But when you show that something's there was this fascinating study that they did with little kids. One thing that little kids generally love to do is color with markers. This is something that just children love to color with markers. So they did a thing where they started rewarding children for coloring with markers. And what they found is that those children stopped coloring on their own nearly as much, and the quality of their drawings dropped. Because the children who were not rewarded for drawing continued to draw just as they did before. So you can actually turn somebody, the more you're like, just think about something like violin. If you're like, wow, it is a real privilege to take violin lessons. This is amazing. You are so good at violin. You're playing so much violin. We need to get you some new music. Maybe we need to get you a stand. Like you're so great. We're going to get you a music stand. Like you don't just have it like propped up. And it's a privilege. Like if you're not going to practice, I'm not going to pay for it, because this is like a cool thing. And like, I don't want to take the teacher's time up. Maybe other people can't take this class if you're using the time. And if you're not practicing, there's no good to it. Then you feel like, oh my gosh, this is a cool thing that I should do. Whereas if somebody's like, oh, you can have 3 cookies if you practice your violin. Then you start feeling like, oh my God, like I don't care about the cookies. I don't want to practice.
Right. Well, it seems to me that a lot of workplaces set up work that way. Get through the drudgery and maybe get some benefit. Yeah. And again, there's another concept that I appreciate from you is that people do best what they like to do. Yeah. Getting people to be in the right places doing what they like to do, fitting the right people into the right job so it's enjoyable. Yeah. You don't have to use the carrot or the stick, either one, to get them to do what they're there to do or what we're there to do.
Yeah. I mean, most people have an idea of wanting to be productive in the world and help. Like in the Happiness Project, I write about the atmosphere of growth, that this is a big engine of happiness for us. Like we like to feel like we're helping people, that we're improving things, that we're learning things, that we're like, that there's growth in the world that we're attached to, whether that's like helping a garden grow, raising a child, training a puppy, helping a nonprofit like get their finances in order, giving a great presentation at work, answering a bunch of emails. There's something about us that we like to do that. But you can very easily interfere with it. And if it's a bad fit, if there's personality problems, and if people keep insisting that it's unpleasant, or that, oh, thank God it's Friday, or, of course you're going to have a glass of wine after work because it's so terrible to have a work day. I I'm always interested about like ideas of being a workaholic because or talking shop. I love to talk shop. Now, I didn't like talking shop when I was a lawyer, but now I love to talk shop. I'll talk shop all day long. And I think that's a good thing. That's a sign that I'm doing the right thing for me because I'm genuinely interested.
And I love talking it with you. I love your enthusiasm. So, well, one of the struggles that I have found, I think somewhat related to what you were just talking about, is allowing myself to have compassion on myself when I stumble. I just am really hard on myself about stumbling or making mistakes, at least for a lot of my life. Can you talk a little bit about what you've discovered around compassion and how it lays a better groundwork for success?
Yeah, it's interesting. With habits, a lot of times people think that if they really beat themselves up, if they screw up, that they're going to really arm themselves to do a better job, or they kind of energize themselves to be more committed to a habit. But in fact, what research shows is that people do better kind of getting back in the saddle of the habit when they do show compassion for themselves, when they say things like, well, I learned that lesson the hard way, or, well, that was not my best day. We've all done it, and really kind of are not too hard on themselves. And in Better Than Before, I outlined the 21 strategies that we can use to make or break our habits. And there's 21 sounds like a lot. It sounds kind of like too many, but it's good because some of them work for some people and not others, and some are available to us at some times and not others. But one very useful strategy is the strategy of safeguards, which is when you think about like, well, how might I fail? What is going to be challenging to me? So, okay, I'm going to the office holiday party. What is that probably going to be like? What challenges is that going to present to me? And like, how do I think about it in advance? And then, okay, let's say I did slip up. How can I fail small instead of failing big? Because a lot of times what people do is they're like, well, I broke my diet and had 3 cookies at the office party as I was walking out the door. And so now I'm just going to come home and eat an entire pumpkin pie because I've blown it. What's one thing to eat 3 cookies is another thing to eat 3 cookies and a pumpkin pie. So you want to be able to manage failure. So it sounds kind of pessimistic to always be planning for failure, but it really helps people do a better job because they think about, well, how can I avoid slipping up? And then once I do slip up, what do I do? What do I do to catch myself? There's a great proverb, a stumble may prevent a fall. And so you might say like, okay, well, I screwed up this time in a small way, and maybe that's going to help me in some bigger challenge. Like, oh yeah, I had to deal with this in the office party, but now I'm going on a week-long vacation to Europe. What did I learn from the little office party situation that's going to help me face a much bigger challenge, which is like a week-long trip? Because a lot of people, it's like, this doesn't count. And then one of my favorite strategies to study was the strategy of loophole spotting, which is the 10 categories.
I was just about to ask you about loopholes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God, they're hilarious. But that's one of them is this doesn't count. The this doesn't count loophole. Oh, I'm on vacation. This doesn't count. Oh, it's my birthday. This doesn't count. And then there's so many concern for others loophole. Oh, it's going to hurt the host's feelings if I don't have a piece of his birthday cake. There's fake self-actualization loophole. Life's too short not to eat a brownie. I want to accept myself just as I am. I have to enjoy this now or miss out forever. There's false choice loophole. That's one of my personal favorites. I've been so busy writing, I don't have time to go to the doctor, or I don't have time to work out. It's like, really? I think you could work a full day and go to the gym. Like that's a false choice. Tomorrow loophole, doesn't matter what I do today because starting tomorrow I'm going to be so good. And then there's moral licensing loophole. Doesn't matter what I do today because I was so good yesterday. And so there's all kinds of loopholes, and we are just so ingenious.
Is there something that you believe in the core of your being to be true that most other people probably won't agree with you on?
I don't think you need to drink water. I don't think you have to make yourself drink water. There's a lot of evidence that like this whole 8 cups a day, you don't need. And I know you're looking for something more transcendent, but this is the thing that leaps to my mind. People work, like when I talk to people about habit formation, so often this is the first habit that they mention. And if it makes you feel good to drink water, like there's some, fine. But for most people, there is so many more habits that you only have so much energy to work on your habits there's habits that would make a much bigger difference in your happiness and your productivity and your creativity and your health than that one. And so it kind of makes me sad when people are like putting so much energy into something that I really don't think gives them very much bang for their buck. Especially if you're buying water, like you do not need to buy water. So that's expensive and it's a hassle. And you know what I always say? It's like, okay, there's all this research, Mayo Clinic talking about how you don't need to drink water. But this is the thing about the human body. I don't even think you need to, you can just think, we get questioner, you're a questioner. We can just think about this. The human body does not depend on us being conscientious for anything important. Does it wait for you to decide to eat? No, it doesn't. It prompts you. It's got a gun in your back and it's making you eat. It doesn't, you don't have to like put it get an app that's going to remind you to go to the bathroom. Like at a certain point, you're just going to go. Same with sleep. You will pass out. You can't go against what your body needs. And thirst is like one of the most important things. You die of thirst way before you die of hunger. It's so important. And I think a lot of people have literally just don't remember what it's like to be thirsty because they drink water all the time. Let yourself get thirsty and you will realize it is the most uncomfortable feeling of all time. You will be desperate to get something to drink. And so the body, and that's what the research shows. It's like really following your own level of thirst, unless you're like an exceptional medical case, is going to guide you. And if you need water, you're going to feel like drinking water. You don't need to constantly, do checklists and write it down and, constantly be getting up from your desk at the office. And again, like if you like to drink water, it's fine. It's just like, if it's like drinking water or getting enough sleep at night is really going to give you a much bigger bang for your effort than drinking water.
Yeah, sleep is one thing that I have learned not to cut out of my life. Yeah. And I make sure I get plenty of that. Well, I don't want to get away without at least a quick dip into your love of reading. Are there 3 adult books as well as 3 adolescent books that you believe every adult should read because of the impact that you've seen them have on others?
There's a Zen proverb, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I think for most books that are transformative for people, it's about reading the right book at the right time. It's not about that particular book. Like for one person, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning could be like extraordinarily moving and very powerful. But another person would read it and it just wouldn't hit them with the same force, which is why I think it's important to be reading a lot, because you never know when something is going to jump up.
Absolutely.
I read a book that transformed my habits, Gary Taubes' book, Why We Get Fat. And I read it on a lark. I was on vacation. I didn't think it was going to, I didn't think particularly anything of it. I didn't give it any particular weight. And it's probably had, one of the most dramatic changes in my life of anything I've ever read, and so part of it is just being open to that and reading enough so that you expose yourself. Yeah, because I have a book club where every month I recommend like a book about happiness and good habits, a work of children's literature or young adult literature, because I'm obsessed with children's literature, and then one eccentric pick, which is a book that I'm like, I love this book, but I'm not saying it's for everybody because I have very eccentric tastes. And it's so fun because I'm not saying like this is the best book. I'm just saying like here's a great book. And, I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And so I've gone through, and it's such a relief to me to have someplace to spotlight these wonderful books. But I don't have to put them in order, which is like so hard.
Has there been an eccentric book that after you recommended it, folks came back and said, wow, I wouldn't have known this had it not been for your recommendation, but it really resonated in some way?
Yeah, the book that I think and I recommend this book all the time, and I say to people, like, this is a very unusual book, but people really are blown away by it the way that I am, is a book by Christopher Alexander called A Pattern Language, and I have it right here in my office right now. And it's this very interesting book about design, the design of homes, offices, and towns. But instead of, how like a lot of times like an interior design book, it's like your chandelier should be 16 inches off of your dining room table, or like, paint your room purple. What he is interested in doing is he identifies 253 patterns that he argues are just consistent in like architecture that people are drawn to. And what's fascinating about the book is he'll have pictures, like he'll show like a 17th century Norwegian farmhouse and a California ranch house from 1930 and like some French chateau. And you'll see, and it's things like cascade of roofs, half-wild garden, child cave, secret place, garden overlooking life, covered terrace, sleeping to the east. There are all these things, and it's like I am not a very visual person, and so for me it was just so enlightening to have, like, I'd walk into a restaurant, I'd think something feels really great about this restaurant. Like, what is it about this space that's so appealing to me? And I would say, oh, it's ceilings at different heights, and it's, waist high shelf, and it's seating nooks, and and it kind of identifies these things. And now anytime I know somebody who's like going to do a renovation or is planning anything, I'm like, you've got to read this book, because it just shows you so much about, like, I live in New York City, and there are all these parks. There's a lot of little tiny parks. And he has a whole thing about some parks are full of people and some parks are deserted.
Are not.
I'd always wondered that. Like, why is it that nobody goes into this park? But then another park that's the same size, there's lots of people. Well, there's all kinds of reasons for that. Having to do with light and how do you sit and what are you looking at and where are the paths, and it's just fascinating.
It is.
And the way that it's organized, it's like written in these separate paragraphs, so you don't have to read through it from beginning to end. You can just sort of flip through it. It makes sense any way you read it. And so it's just fascinating to me. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, my mind was blown by that. It's very suggestive. It gives you lots of thoughts.
It is. It's been around for a number of years.
Yeah.
I read it about 20 years ago. We bought a farm and an old farmhouse to start remodeling and working on the land and building structures. And I need to go back in and find it and reread it again. But it was loaned to me by a friend at the time in architecture, and I'd forgotten about it. So thank you. I'm glad I asked. I need to pull that back out.
Yeah. It's an expensive book.
Yes.
I think it's like $40 or something like that. But it's really cool. I'm so glad. But see, you remember it 20 years later.
Do.
I mean, even that's unusual, right? Like, even if you don't remember much about it, like the fact that you even remember that you read it.
I do.
Must have made a big impression at the time.
And I'm glad I asked. That's why I asked the questions.
Yes, yeah. It's a great question.
It brings me back.
Question.
They're selfish questions. I want to find out what other people are reading so I can read new and interesting things.
Me too. That's the best way to get reading suggestions.
Yeah. So what do you want to be remembered for?
What did Woody Allen say? Not dying. I don't worry about that very much.
Okay. Is there one thought that you'd like to leave with listeners that you believe could make a difference in their lives?
Absolutely. And that is, like, so many people I talk to are very discouraged about their habits. Like, they've made the same New Year's resolution multiple times. Like, they don't even make a New Year's resolution anymore. They're discouraged. They say things about themselves like, I have no willpower, I have no self-control. They feel like very hopeless about making an important change in their life. And what I've seen over and over is, like, when you really, like you talked about self-awareness, when you really understand what's true for you, and when you think about how you can set up a habit or a process in your life in the way that works for you, you're much more likely to succeed. Like, if you can figure out, like, what works for you, it's not that hard to change habits, but you have to do it in the way that's right for you. It doesn't matter what Steve Jobs did. It doesn't matter what your sister-in-law did. It doesn't matter what Ben Franklin did. Maybe what worked for them will work for you, but maybe not. And so, but there really is hope for people who feel like, I have to give up on this dream, or I have to let go of this idea that I can do X, Y, Z. Because really, when you unlock the way that works for you, not what you should be able to do, not what people tell you ought to do, really people are able to make really very significant changes. And then that makes them happier.
Bingo. Good note to close on.
Excellent.
Gretchen, I have so looked forward to this conversation, and it has been a delight. Thank you for your time and your energy and enthusiasm.
Well, it's been so much fun talking to you. I feel like we could talk all afternoon. Now, go home and read Pattern Language, and you will be so happy. 20
years later, I'll appreciate it at a different level than I did then. Entirely.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, have a great night.
Thanks for listening to The Creator's Journey. If you enjoyed our theme music, the name of the song is You've Got a Home by Krista Wells. The Creator's Journey is published the first and third Sundays of each month, except for July and December. If you enjoyed the show, I would appreciate having you go to iTunes and subscribe. While you're there, if you give us a favorable rating and review, it'll make a huge difference in helping a newcomer easily find it. You can find links to today's guests, the people and books we talked about, and email me with your wonderful thoughts, all at thecreatorsjourney.com. I want to thank Yodelist for sponsoring this episode of The Creator's Journey. Yodelist is an interactive marketing platform for people in the creative world. With a vetted database of contacts from across the industry, Yodelist helps photographers, illustrators, creative directors, designers, producers, stylists, and many others to locate potential clients and gives them the tools to make those connections happen. If you want to find out how Yodelist helps creative people find one another for work, just go to yodelist.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/TCJ. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Here's a short excerpt from the audiobook, Better Than Before, both written and read by the author, Gretchen Rubin. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm a kind of street scientist. I spend most of my time trying to grasp the obvious, not to see what no one has seen, but to see what's in plain sight. A sentence will jump off the page, or someone's casual comment, like my friend's remark about the track team, will strike me as highly significant for reasons that I don't quite understand. Then, as I learn more, these loose puzzle pieces begin to fit together until the picture becomes clear. The more I learned about habits, the more interested I became, but I also became increasingly frustrated. To my surprise, the sources I consulted made little mention of many of the issues that struck me as most crucial. Perhaps it's understandable why it's hard to form a habit we don't enjoy, but why is it hard to form a habit we do enjoy? Sometimes people acquire habits overnight, and sometimes they drop long-time habits just as abruptly. Why? Why do some people dread and resist habits, while others adopt them eagerly? Why do so many successful dieters regain their lost weight, plus more? Why are people so often unmoved by the consequences of their habits? For instance, 1/3 to 1/2 of U.S. patients don't take medicine prescribed for a chronic illness. Do the same strategies work for changing simple habits, wearing a seatbelt, and for complex habits, drinking less? Why is it that sometimes, though we're very anxious, even desperate to change a habit, we can't? A friend told me, I have health issues and I feel lousy when I eat certain foods, but I eat them anyway. Do the same habit formation strategies apply equally well to everyone? Certain situations seem to make it easier to form habits. Which ones and why? I was determined to find the answers to those questions and to figure out every aspect of how habits are made and broken.